I'm Tim Monroe, and this is what I really want to talk about. There's something fascinating about every single one of us. Everybody has a passion and a story to tell, something that lights them up. Every week I sit down with interesting people and we talk about the things that really matter to them and to all of us. It might be funny, it might be weighty, it might be weird. It's what I really want to talk about. I'm talking today to Bill Littlefield. Bill is a retired radio host, writer, teacher, and public speaker. He has written 9 books, 7 of which have been published. For 34 years, he wrote and voiced commentaries for WBUR in Boston and NPR. For 25 of those years, he also hosted Only a Game, NPR's fantastic weekly sports magazine program. I had the distinct privilege of having a front row seat to Bill's boundless talent as a writer and a host years ago when I also worked at WBUR in Boston, where Only a Game was produced. A graduate of Yale University and the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Bill also taught English at Curry College in Milton, Mass. For 39 years and served as writer in residence there. Bill is also involved with the Emerson Prison Initiative, a program that makes a college education more accessible to people who are incarcerated. Welcome, Bill. Great to see you. What do you really want to talk about today?
Well, I think it'd be fun to talk about some of the things that I've written since retiring from radio. If folks will hang in there with us, we can review what Only a Game was all about, just to give them some background, I guess.
Yeah, remind us of that. I mean, I think people who know you probably know you from hosting Only a Game for 25 years. So what are some of the memorable stories or contributors or characters that you met along the way there?
It's a long list.
Yeah.
And a lot of the most memorable people wouldn't mean anything to an audience. People assume, I think, that when you have a chance to interview somebody who's a multi-million-dollar superstar baseball player, basketball player, whatever it might be, that's kind of the top of the line. And that was never really the case for me. I remember, for example, going into the visitors' locker room in Fenway Park one day with no particular assignment and no particular story in mind. And there was a young Latino guy sitting in front of his locker. And I didn't even know who he was, but everybody else in the locker room was either watching TV or playing cards. And this guy was sitting looking at a book in front of his locker. And I walked over and introduced myself. And I said, I'm just curious. Everybody else is watching TV and playing cards, and you're sitting here. I said, what are you reading? And he held up this book. And it was one of those books that has a list of words on one page and an essay on the other page with blanks, and you have to figure out where the words go.
Oh, yeah.
So he was learning English.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, that's terrific. How's it going? And he said, well, it's going pretty well. It's going pretty well. I had introduced myself as a radio guy from public radio. He said, it's going pretty well. He said, I keep at it. I may have your job one day. And that was a very memorable moment, because it's a sort of reinforcement of the notion that these guys are people, they're all the athletes. And another very kind of nice moment.
Who was that? Did he become well known, or was
no,
he just
I don't think
journeyman?
So. He was a Minnesota Twins guy who was probably up for a cup of coffee, but who knows? I don't remember. Some of the people, of course, I do remember. I got to meet Joan Benoit Samuelson and got to interview her, and have huge respect for her, not only as an athlete, but as an activist. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar also. I got to talk to him several times after he retired. And I remember one time I did an interview with him, and I said, the first thing I said before we really get into the interview itself, I said, I wasn't sure how to introduce you for this interview, but I thought I'd probably say writer, historian, activist, and who happened to play a little basketball.
Right.
And he said, that's too long.
Well,
very articulate guy and a terrific person.
Interesting you mentioned Jabbar, because he was one of the inspirations for this podcast. This idea that everybody has a passion that they really want to talk about.
Yep.
I have a friend who has a podcast about comic books, um, and he interviewed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar because he's a huge comic book junkie. Um, and who knew? Like, who
Right,
knew? But
right,
he was
right.
a very complex guy. Well, I remember I was there for about 6 years, but I remember so many interesting people in and out of your show, and I think some of the contributors, like Charlie Pierce and Frank DeFord in the
Yes.
beginning.
Yeah,
And Tim Kirkchin used to be a regular.
absolutely a regular.
He's everywhere now. He's
Well,
Mr.
Tim,
Baseball.
the beauty of Tim was for us,
Hmm.
Tim knew more about baseball and what was going on inside Major League Baseball than anybody,
Right.
but he was canny enough to know that only a games audience wasn't necessarily interested in
Hmm.
all of the trivia that he
Hmm.
could bring to it, and he recognized who he was talking to.
Right.
That was also true of a fellow named Atner, who we used to talk to about football. And he recognized that in talking to me, he was talking to a guy who didn't have any use for football.
Right.
So although he
Yeah.
knew a great deal about the NFL, every time I'd say something that was half intelligent, he'd say, "Bill, you're getting to be a fan."
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, he'd give me a hard time. Whereas
Yeah.
my main interest in the NFL was trying to get him to do more things to prevent brain injuries.
Protect
And
the players. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, it
exactly.
was such a great show for such a long time, and there hasn't been anything to take its place, which is, there's really not been any NPR sports program to sort of take its place, which is a little bit sad. Maybe somebody will come up with one.
Well,
Yeah.
time is goes on for a while, we hope.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get into your book. Your latest book is called Mercy. Um, and I just finished reading it literally this morning. And I very much enjoyed it. This is this your second novel or third novel?
Let's see. It depends on how you count. It's my fourth novel. One of them never will be published. The
Okay.
first two are Prospect and
Yeah.
Circus in the Woods.
I remember
So
Prospect. I
this is
read that years ago.
the third one that was published, and the fifth one is called Jack Miller's Tale, which I hope will be published. But so far, I haven't had any luck with that one.
Okay. Okay. And Mercy, when did Mercy come out?
A couple of years ago.
Okay. Okay. So let's go back a bit. Where did your writing, how did you start writing? Where did your writing journey begin?
I think it probably began in any kind of systematic way when I was in college.
Hmm.
And I had the incredible good fortune to have two excellent professors in creative writing courses, one in my junior year, one in my senior year. And the one in my junior year particularly was very encouraging. And then after I moved up to Boston, I got hooked up with the Boston Ledger, which was a throwaway newspaper that would appear on
Yeah.
your doorstep for free if you
Yes.
lived in the wrong neighborhood.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I wrote a column for that, and I got some encouragement and basically used that to talk my way onto public radio.
Hmm.
And meanwhile, was teaching and writing, and things fell into place, and I had a lot of good luck, and eventually wrote a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you have. Mercy is a book about a lot of things. I mean, there's lots of themes in there. Where did the idea for Mercy come from? How did you, and I guess maybe a better question is sort of a process question. As a writer, do you start thinking, I'm going to write a book about X, or does it sort of just evolve as you write?
I think probably sometimes it's I'm going to write a book about, because
Yeah.
my first novel, Prospect, came from um, the realization when I knew this guy. I got to know this guy pretty well, who was a Major League Baseball scout, worked for the Major League Scouting Bureau.
Hmm.
And he had all these great stories
Yeah.
in baseball. And I thought, what if I wrote a novel with a main character who was a scout? And
Hmm.
then every time I didn't know what to say next in the novel, he could tell a great baseball story.
Right.
And, that would be great. It'd be sort
Hmm.
of a crutch. So
Hmm.
that was, oh, yeah, I'm going to write a novel and it's going to have a baseball scout as a main character.
Yeah.
Although very quickly another character became
Hmm.
equally important.
Hmm.
With Mercy, it wasn't the same at all. I wrote what became the first chapter, which is about a man's um, confusion about what to tell his child, his son, when the son says to him one day, "What happens when you die?"
Right.
And the man doesn't know quite what to do. He doesn't know whether to give him some sort of standard religious interpretation. Well, after you die, you go to heaven and you get to meet everybody again that you ever knew on earth. Or to say nobody knows, or to say, well, that's the kind of thing that we spend our lives trying to live with and understand, or at least feel.
Right.
And he's talking to a friend about this, and he goes through this process of, how do I deal with this? I wrote that years ago and shared it with several people, and had got some suggestions on how to sort of horse around with it. And then, well, after I retired, I started writing bits and pieces of other things that had similar sorts of concerns. How do we live in the world? How do we make sense of things? How do we go from day to day without despair?
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was that there was something that hooked all these little pieces together that I was writing, sometimes writing 3 or 4 of them at a time. And that was mercy, grace, the opportunity to find in other people enough encouragement and support and love and promise to carry on. And so that's what held that together as far as I was trying to do.
Yeah, so you kind of had that in your head as you were writing, that idea that this concept of mercy
I
is
really
kind of
didn't.
carrying through.
I didn't have it consciously in my head. I was
Yeah.
trying to write about things that I was learning about. And at the same time I was writing these stories, I was working with incarcerated guys who were getting
Right.
a college degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I was learning something about how the justice system worked and didn't work,
Mm-hmm.
with a heavy emphasis on the latter.
Mm-hmm.
I was meeting guys that I never would have had a chance to meet and get to know in any context other than spending one day a week in a medium security prison in Massachusetts.
Right.
So they became important and their voices became important. One of the main characters in Mercy is an old gangster type guy who gets let out of prison basically on a humanitarian ground, which is he's going to die soon.
Yeah.
He's no danger to anybody. Let's let him die at home.
Right.
And of course, I couldn't resist the comic possibility that he would go home and start to get better.
Right.
And then a parole officer would have to come in and say, "Hey, this guy's getting better. Put him
Send
back."
back. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I actually talked to a doctor, a retired doctor, who was a fellow who examined incarcerated people who were eligible for humanitarian release.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him that question. He said, "Geez, I don't know what would happen. I don't think that's ever happened."
Yeah. Yeah. I can't imagine them, like, for instance, letting Whitey Bulger go home if he were sick in
No,
prison, right? Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
no. And but the thing is, it's very hard for anybody to imagine most of what would have to happen, because the bureaucracy of the prison system is so hopelessly
Yeah.
convoluted and complicated and
Yeah.
slow, that it's amazing that anything ever happens according to plan.
And so this book is largely set in a suburban
Right.
neighborhood, where a lot of houses have been torn down and newer, bigger houses built, and people trying to live this very sort of neat, I guess, structured life, and yet you really make it clear that sort of underneath all of that is potentially something very, very different.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
underneath is desperation and
Yeah.
sometimes despair, and
Mm-hmm.
how do people find their way out of that? And the answer, I think, is that they find each other.
Yeah.
There's a character in it who's a police officer who finds he is in charge for a while of a woman who's obviously very seriously disturbed,
Mm-hmm.
and has no idea how to help her. And she's inadvertently committed a murder. And her friend or acquaintance, workmate, comes in to see if if she can help. And of course, there's
Yeah.
nothing that she can
Yeah.
do. But the police officer is so moved by the friend and by her coming into the police office and police station and saying, "What can I do? Can I help?" that he falls in love with her.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And he falls in love with her intention,
Hmm.
and they find each other. It's kind of a fantasy
Yeah.
story, but to me, it's the kind of thing that makes it possible for people to carry on.
Yeah. So there's this great passage that I think really underlines. Do you have your book with you there? No.
Yeah, on the shelf. Hold on a
Yeah.
second.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be better if you read it.
Yeah.
So there's this passage on page 19. I assume we have the same edition.
There's only one edition.
Okay, good. All right. So uh it's in the middle of the page and it starts, it's when they're talking about Catherine, the wife of the mob boss, who lives in this house in that neighborhood, keeping the house up.
Hmm.
And it
Hmm.
starts with,
He was right. Anything less would have drawn attention to her. People in the neighborhood are people. They do what people do. Somebody lies to her husband and somebody hits his kid. Somebody's got a bottle in the garage and somebody else looks over his shoulder while he's on the job and steals what he can. Some go to church and some don't, and they've all got secrets. But nobody lets their lawn grow long.
yeah, I think that's just so great. That really, I mean, I don't know about you. I grew up in the suburbs,
Yeah.
outside Chicago, and you lived in the suburbs in Boston, I think, for a long time.
Yes, indeed.
And they're all sort of clean and neat and tidy, and but the the deeper you dig, the more you found out that everybody is just a person with their own foibles, their own sense of pain, their own shame, their own secrets, and that
And
really comes out.
their own capacity to connect with each other as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, there's some awful things that happen in Mercy, and
Hmm.
people hurt each other in terrible
Hmm.
ways.
Yeah,
But there's also merciful connection and grace. And yeah, I wasn't trying to say anything about, well, here's the answer, here's a how-to book or anything
right.
like that. It was just observations
Yeah, yeah,
of sort of how people get through their days.
yeah. And so the book it does have a narrative structure, but it's also this sort of lots of characters, stories, that maybe at first you don't realize they connect, but they all do. They're all interconnected in some way.
Right,
Um,
right.
does that take a lot of planning and plotting, or does that just sort of come naturally? I keep
Well,
asking these process questions because I'm very interested in all that.
yeah, well, it's an interesting topic.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. As I say, I was writing these different stories, sometimes writing two or three of them at the same time. I
Hmm.
get stuck on one and do something on the other one. And I got to a certain point and I realized that there was a very natural ending to what I had been doing.
Hmm.
And after I'd written that chapter that ended up being the final chapter, uh, I printed them all out and put a paper clip on each chapter and spread them out on the floor.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, now, given the flexibility of fiction, which is you can jump back and forth in
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be entirely chronological.
Yeah.
Can I arrange these things in such a way that they actually make up a coherent
An
book?
arc. Yeah.
And I think I did.
Yeah.
There are some strange moments in there. Um, but for example, there are two women who find each other
Yeah.
and establish a life,
Hmm.
and you see them loving each other, and then only later learn sort of how they found each other, which chronologically is confusing, but I people do it in fiction all the time, so
Right.
I don't think it's really an issue.
So when you were writing those, you said stories, did you think you were just writing stories, or did you think you were writing a novel?
I think for a long time I thought I was just writing stories.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I realized that some of the characters were slipping in and out of each other's stories.
Yep. Hmm.
And I realized that there was, as you suggested, a place
Hmm.
that was central,
Hmm.
and I think that was because in a lot of fiction, and particularly, well, not a lot of fiction, not just fiction by writers here in the US, but a lot of fiction, place is tremendously important.
Oh,
When you
yeah.
think about somebody like Faulkner,
Yes.
where Yakima County is the center of I mean, everything takes place in the
Hmm.
place that he knew so well and presented so well. And the suburb in which these stories take place, is pretty bland.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's not like Kentucky, right?
Right.
It's not like New Orleans.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's it's not like any New York City. It's
Yeah.
not like a place that has a powerful sense of being,
Hmm.
something other than other places. And so I think that's one of the things that makes it necessary and important for people to find their own way to be and their own sense of meaning and
Yeah.
shape,
Yeah.
because the place isn't going to give it to them.
Right.
They have to make it.
But in this place you describe as like a bland suburban setting, you do throw a mob boss right in the middle of
Yeah,
it, right?
yeah, because the
Yeah.
mob boss is a person too. He's a
Yeah.
terrible person. He's done
Yeah.
terrible things. He's
Hmm.
employed other people to do terrible things. But in his own way, he loves his wife and he wants her to be comfortable. And so he takes a certain chunk of his money and he buys this big house and he
Hmm.
puts her in it.
Hmm.
He's, you know, the idea is that he's doing something for her.
Right.
And of course, eventually she finds a way to turn what he has done into something far, far more positive
Different.
and
Yeah.
wonderful.
And that when he is released from prison, as you talked about before, as this like sort of humanitarian release as he's dying,
Yes,
the neighbors know he's there now.
yes,
And it sort
yes.
of changes the dynamic of the
Well, I
neighborhood.
mean,
Yeah.
it gives them an opportunity to talk about something, and
Yes. Yeah.
the thing I love about it is their variety.
Hmm.
Some of them say this is a terrible thing. I mean,
Yeah.
people are going to learn that we have this career criminal
Right.
dying
Right.
in a house on our street, and it's
Hmm.
going to be a very bad thing. And others say, no, no, people are going to be curious.
Yeah.
The real estate values are going to skyrocket because,
Right.
because Arthur Balladino is dying in this house.
Right. It was a great discussion about whether or not he would be able to sell the house after he died, and what would
Right,
the value be,
right.
and would it be more valuable because a mob boss died in it or less, or
Yeah, right, which
yeah,
is exactly the kind of thing that people talk about.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
constantly Googling their own addresses to see what the value of their house is 6 months after they buy it.
Right. Another theme I really liked, really struck me deeply in this book, is about parenting.
Hmm.
I think that's a big piece of that. You're a parent, I'm a parent, lots of people are parents, but I think you sort of get at something that's really kind of beautiful about the imperfection of parenting and the sort of mystery almost of parenting and this wondering about you have some there's a great line in there about nobody pictures their child as a grown up sitting at the kitchen table worrying about their bills,
Right.
right? Which is really great because you really don't. But now that we're
No.
older and have kids that are like grown up and out of the house, they're doing just that, right? Just like we did, and like we still do. But there's a great passage on page 69, and if you could read those two paragraphs, maybe.
The boy saw things through his own eyes. As time passed, I would assume a less significant role in the script he was creating day by day. I could imagine a time that would come too soon for me and perhaps not soon enough for him when I'd become somebody he thought of infrequently, perhaps with affection, perhaps sometimes with resentment, maybe once in a while as a fumbler who built a treehouse with love and without a carpenter's eye or a carpenter's sense. The boy would grow up like anyone else, I suppose. Like anyone else is a hard truth for a parent to take on. You want to believe your child will be like nobody else. He will be only himself. His teachers will see it. No one would be so blind as to think this young man should take a job for mere money or work with, never for. That was understood, but never work with anyone who couldn't see that he was extraordinary. And they would say of him, his father must have been wise and gentle, for the boy is certainly a wonder.
Yeah, that's so great because it's both about a father's sort of seeing his own son as extraordinary and also wanting his son to see him as at least loving, and he
Adequate.
he tried, right? He tried his best.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I think that's sort of all we can hope for, right?
Yes.
And sometimes our kids are extraordinary, often they're not, and that's okay. But
There are kids and we love them and we do the best we can and hope
yeah,
for the best for them and then stand aside.
yeah, and let me go to what back to one thing because I think it was interesting. So there's these two characters in your book named Gibby and Francis,
Yes.
who are associates, I guess, of the mob boss in some way.
Sometimes employed by Arthur Balladino
Paladino, yeah,
to burn things down.
yeah, and they talk in at least one chapter, maybe more, about prison life. Both about what it would have been like for him, Arthur Balladino, the mob boss in prison, and what it was like for them.
Yes.
Um, and I know you've done some work with incarcerated people. So was there some research you got from that experience that went into this book?
Research is a very formal way to put it, Tim.
Yeah. Okay.
It's research via listening to guys tell stories and via walking through the yard in two medium security prisons and one minimum security prison in which I've worked. There are two things that struck me immediately when I started and have stayed with me since I started working with the Emerson Prison Initiative. One is how many old guys there are in prison.
Yeah.
There are people in wheelchairs, there are people on walkers, there are people walking with leg braces and neck braces, and people who are quite infirm and are still incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is how often the men that I've worked with in these programs laugh. They find ways to kid each other and encourage each other and make each other laugh. And I mean, they're doing something that to me is almost impossible to imagine, which is maintaining some kind of balanced life within the most restrictive and dehumanizing circumstances.
Right.
And I have huge admiration for guys who manage to continue to hold on to their humanity in circumstances designed to strip them of it.
Right. Yeah, and that comes through. I mean, those two characters there's a little bit of comic relief, I think, in
I hope
those
so.
two characters.
I
Yeah,
hope so. I hope in
yeah,
their dialogue there's a lot of comic relief.
yes, for sure. And they're almost like this sort of Greek chorus telling us about, like, this isn't a suburb, but it's really life is really not like that. And yeah, their tone of voice, their voices are really come through. And the other thing is just, this idea of mercy. And I don't want to give away any spoilers here, but at the end of the book, there's this sort of remarkable relationship going between two parents, a man and a wife. And mercy, I've always thought of mercy as something somebody gives to you. You don't necessarily earn it, but it's granted to you for whatever reason, right?
Right.
And so sometimes mercy was granted to Arthur Balladino, let him out of prison, and so he could die at home. And mercy is granted in lots of different ways by different people. But I thought what may be the most powerful part of this book, and really comes out at the end, is that the mercy we grant ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And that was just,
in the form of forgiveness.
Correct.
Right.
Like, and you've said before, like, just how do we go on living and not feel despair? And so talk a little bit about that, because it's so powerful at the end of the book. And again, I don't want to give away the sort of plot points that make this clear, but it's such a powerful idea, that mercy we give ourselves. And again, I have this like writerly question. Is that something you had thought about, or did it just sort of grow out of those characters?
I think probably a little of both.
Yeah.
I think that, well, part of the idea of the importance of forgiving yourself comes from Al-Anon, an experience with family members who've been had real issues with addiction, and
Yeah.
ultimately my own experience with Al-Anon, where I learned something about how people manage to forgive themselves for things that they feel
Right.
terrible guilt for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never, I don't think it's ever complete. I think you do the very best you can to move towards wholeness
Mm-hmm.
and positive attitude. And on your best days, you get there, and on your worst days, you get dragged back and have to rethink and rework the
Mm-hmm.
process, which makes it sound very mechanical, and it doesn't feel very mechanical, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, not a bad way to talk about it. So I think the idea was present, but I think in any fiction that I've written, ultimately, as a great friend of mine and former colleague at Curry once said, you know you're on the right track when your characters wake you up at night to talk to you.
Yeah.
And eventually the characters do begin to tell you what they want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And they begin to take on a life which is three-dimensional enough, real enough, so that you begin to hear them
Mm-hmm.
rather than just think, or what would this guy say next? They tell you
Yeah.
what they want to say next and where they want to go.
Yeah.
And so that, a lot of what's in there, especially the dialogue between Francis and Gibby, I just listened to
Mm-hmm.
them. Damon Runyon probably helped by giving me characters in the past,
Right.
but I just listened to him, and that's the main thing.
Well, and I think your another piece of this book has to do with the institution of marriage,
Mhm.
and the couple Audrey and the character's name is escaping me. The husband.
Well, the character is remains nameless through much
Okay.
of
Yeah.
the novel, but his name is Jack.
Jack. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Audrey and Jack, who are married and imperfectly, I think. And I think you've been married for a very long time. Is that right?
Well, it doesn't feel like a very long time. It feels like
Is
just
your
the
wife
right
in the
time,
room?
just the right amount of time.
And I've been married for 35 years. I'm a relatively young person to have been married for 35 years.
Hmm.
And just as you wrote about that relationship, that is, at times close and intimate, at times not so much. And just the sort of full range of what a marriage can and maybe isn't always ideal, but what it can be. But at the end, I think those two characters um, show mercy for themselves and for each other.
Right.
And it was just a great way to sort of, I mean, it wasn't great because there's some sadness there, but without giving things away. But just this idea that these two people could help each other heal and give each other mercy at the end of the day was just kind of beautiful.
I'm glad. It sounds to me like you're the perfect reader.
Well, I read a lot.
You you kind of got what I was after, and I thank you.
Yeah. Well, is that, there's all these things in this book, Bill. There's the suburbs, there's marriage, there's, death, there's the prisoners, there's so many things going on here. Parenting, as I mentioned before. And it all kind of comes through, at different times in the book. Um, and I think that's unusual. I mean, I don't read many books where all of those things sometimes like they glance up against something or another and then they bounce off to something else, but I feel like it all kind of runs through in this interconnected way. And I just admire how you did that. Like, did you set out to do that, or it just
No,
sort of
I
came
think a
together?
lot of the
Yeah.
process was organic. I think I
Yeah.
was writing about a lot of things that felt like I needed to write about them, and then it came together, as I say, by putting them all down on the floor with paper clips on each chapter. um, I think also what you're saying, I a lot of writing is, especially a lot of fiction, is designed to fit into a category.
Yeah.
Detective fiction,
Hmm.
um, academic,
Hmm.
set in an academic setting,
Hmm.
set in Hollywood. You know what I'm saying.
I
And
do.
there's certain parameters and there's certain ingredients that go into books
Hmm.
where that's what you're trying. If your protagonist is a private investigator, there's a certain amount that's anybody can take for granted.
There's certain conventions that you
Right,
follow.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
That's a better word for
yeah,
it, conventions.
yeah,
And I was not held by that.
yeah.
And I didn't, obviously, when I was writing this thing, I had no idea whether it would be published or not. And
Hmm.
so I didn't have an agent saying,
Hmm.
you got to do this or nobody will buy it.
Hmm.
I didn't have a publisher saying you got to have it finished by
Yeah.
September 3rd or we're going to kick it to the next year. I didn't
Hmm.
have any of that stuff going on. So there was a really nice sort of freedom to it. And then the fact that I sent it to several people and then eventually an outfit called Black Rose Writing published it, which was really nice.
Yeah,
I was happy.
yeah.
I hope they'll like the next one too.
Right.
But
So I'm before I was anything else, I was an English major and an English teacher. And since in the last few years, I've really become more of a writer. And I've written a novel myself, which isn't published yet. Maybe someday it will be. Um,
I
but
hope so.
I had a very similar experience where I've gone to a couple like writing conferences to network with people and learn about writing. And people ask me, "What's your book about?" And I'm like, I don't know. It's about people. Uh,
Right.
it's there's no, it's not a mystery. It's not a horror. It's not detective fiction. It's not any of that stuff. And so many of the people now in those conferences are writing to a market.
Right.
Um, and that thought has never entered my head as I'm writing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think people write to markets and people
Hmm.
who say they can tell you how to write
Hmm.
will tell you how to write the things that they think you can sell.
Yeah.
And it's great to not have those restraints.
Right.
It's great in the sense that you can write whatever you want. It's not so great when you're trying to sell it because the publishers and the agents ask exactly the question
Hmm.
that you've just posited,
Who's
which
going
is
to
how am
read
I going to
this?
sell it? How
Yeah.
am I
Who's
going to
going to
sell
read
it to
this?
somebody? Who's going to
Yeah.
buy it?
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, it's tough.
Guys like you and me, but there probably aren't that many of us around anymore, right?
I think there are probably a lot,
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah,
but most of them, unfortunately, we won't see their stuff.
yeah. So as another process question, you may have heard this these phrases, but I listen to a lot of sort of writing podcasts, and there's this concept of that there's two kinds of fiction writers. There's a plotter and a pantser.
Mhm.
And a plotter like outlines everything ahead of time and is very organized, and a pantser just writes, by the seat of their pants.
Right.
Where would you fit in that spectrum?
I'm very suspicious of either or.
Yeah. Okay.
So I mean, sometimes I sit down. Let's talk about Mercy. That sometimes when I
Yeah.
would sit down to work on it, I would know exactly what I was going to do next.
Hmm.
So I would know exactly what Gibby and Francis were going to say to each other, or I would know exactly what the two women who fall in love with each other were going to say to each other, or where they were going to go, or whatever. And other times I wouldn't know at all.
Hmm.
And there would be no plan, and I would have to go through, geez, what other chapter am I working on? Maybe there's something I can do on that chapter today.
Hmm. Hmm.
So somewhere in between, I certainly was not one of those people who had the whole thing laid out as in
Yeah.
storyboards.
Hmm.
But and I mean the same with Prospect, the first novel I
Yeah.
wrote. I can remember the day many years ago. I was sitting at my desk on summer vacation out at Curry, and I suddenly knew what the last scene in Prospect was going to be.
Yeah.
I was still short of that scene. I
Hmm.
had probably 30, 40, 50 pages to write to get there, but I knew what the last scene was.
Yeah.
And I got so restless that I had to get up and walk around the campus for an hour because I knew if I stayed at my desk, I would proceed to that last scene.
Hmm.
And it wasn't time. A whole lot of stuff
Yeah.
had to happen first, but I
Hmm.
knew it, and it
Hmm.
was terrible.
Yeah, but that's
I had
amazing
to hold
though.
myself back from, and so
Yeah.
in that sense, there was a plan because I knew I
Mhm.
had to get to that last scene because I knew what it was.
Right. I had a similar experience where I was at a week-long retreat and I was sitting there just doing a lot of thinking, and an idea struck me about one character, which I won't go into the details about, but that idea led me to know, oh, this is a book. Like
Hmm.
it just
Hmm.
somehow it made me realize, okay, I get it, how it's going to sort of come together, and
Isn't that a great feeling? That's fun when
and
that
it
happens.
just it seemed to come unbidden. I
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
It just sort of they talk about a light bulb or whatever, and it wasn't anything profound. It was just, oh, okay, I sort of see maybe where this is going to go now.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. But like
Yeah.
you said, then you
It
have to
happens.
write it. Then you have to like
Right.
it.
You still
Yeah,
have to do it.
right. Yeah,
It's still a question of putting one word after the next,
yeah.
and then finding one or more people to look at it and say, yeah, this really works. Yeah, you know what? This really doesn't.
Yeah, I've done that. I've had a really great editor look at my book, and she was generally complimentary, but then also was like, this doesn't work or that doesn't work. And some of the challenge for me is like, well, I really like that part. I don't,
Yeah, yeah, I
you know what
know,
I
I
mean?
know, I know.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah.
So
Well, that
what's
used to
next?
happen in radio too.
Yeah,
Where you'd put a piece together and then one of your colleagues would say, well, yeah, but it's 6.5 minutes long and
right,
we want a 4 minute piece here.
right. Yeah,
And you got to take this out. And you feel like, oh no.
I don't
And
want
they
to take
have to
that out. Yeah.
remember, same thing with writing and radio. It's the same thing.
Hmm.
No reader, no listener ever knows what isn't in there.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they don't worry about what you've taken out. They don't know about
Yeah.
that.
I did a podcast recently with a guest about poetry, and one of the things we talked about was how poetry, even more than fiction, this idea that what you don't put in is more important, maybe even than what you do, because it's all
Right.
so every word is so significant. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what's next? Do you have another book that you're working
Yeah, I
on,
have a
or
book that just came out, as a matter of fact,
okay,
which is Who Taught That Mouse to Write? And
okay,
it's a book of doggerel about animals
mm-hmm,
for parents and grandparents to read with their kids. And it just came out. It's only available right now through Amazon.
okay,
We're hoping to get it to a point where it's also available to bookstores. And the first couple of reviews were really good. We're happy with it. I've
yeah.
already heard from some folks who've read it to their kids and gave it 5 stars. So
So
uh,
people who aren't familiar with the term doggerel, what is doggerel?
I'll read you one. I'll
Okay,
read you
good.
one.
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
I'm gonna read you one of my favorites. As I said, this book is about all different animals, and this particular one is about termites.
Okay.
So I don't know how well you can. This is illustration.
Yeah.
The
Okay. Yeah, I can
termites
see.
and a
Yep. Yep.
wonderful illustrator, Steve Corin, a friend for many, many years that I worked with. So this is termites. Wood's good for building. Who wouldn't agree? It's hard and it lasts and it comes from a tree. You saw it and nail it. And when it's complete, the building it's built is most certainly neat. Oh, who wouldn't doubt wood is a choice you should make when building a building to last? For Pete's sake, there's hardly a reason wood wouldn't endure. At night, termites giggle and nod and say, sure.
That's fantastic. I love that. I have memories, Bill, of you uh occasionally doing some sports related doggerel on
Yes,
Only a Game or as a commentary on WBUR.
yes.
And it was always really fun. And of course, famously, every year you would do Super Bowl
Super
haiku,
Bowl haiku.
and people would send in their haiku, and you'd pick a few to read on the air. And
Yep.
I think you picked one of mine one year,
Yes, I'm
and I
sure.
was super proud.
Well,
So
we had a lot of fun with that. And you're
yeah.
mentioning the Super Bowl haiku and the doggerel.
Hmm.
I mean, this, of course, is the both the benefit and the risk. Some people looked forward to Super Bowl haiku. They said we look forward to every year Super Bowl haiku. Other people would write emails and leave messages saying, "Okay, enough, stop it.
Stop
It's
the haiku.
awful. Stuff's terrible." Just like some people would say to me, write in. when you do the segment with Charlie Pierce, we love it because we love your laugh when Charlie was funny. And other people would write in and say, that fake cackle with Charlie is driving me off. I'm not going to listen to your show anymore and so you got to say, okay, well, what people make of it, they make of it. Just the same with a book. You put it out there and somebody says, this is the most silly, effort of novel that I ever saw. Right. Okay, that's what somebody thought. And somebody else says, I liked it a lot. Okay, that's good too.
Yeah. Well, I know for a fact that might have been a cackle, but there was nothing fake about it.
No, he made me laugh, as Charlie, many things did.
Charlie made a lot of people laugh. Yeah.
There used to be, I'm not sure this is still around, but there used to be something called Take Your Daughter to Work Day. Mm-hmm. And I brought my daughter, Amy, when she was about, I don't know, 11 or 12. Mm-hmm. I brought her in for Take Your Daughter to Work Day. Mm-hmm. And it was only a half day. So we did some work in the morning. We did some recording and we had a meeting that she sat in on, and that, staff meeting for only a game and this and that. And we got in the car to go home and she said, Dad, I want to have a job like you when I grow up. And I said, well, what do you mean? What makes it an attractive job? And she said, you laughed all day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, well, yeah, that's right. I did. Pretty much how some days go. So
yeah. So Bill, this has been a really great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk. Is there another novel coming out or that you're working on?
Well, as I say, Jack Miller's Tale is currently being read. I actually wrote Jack Miller's Tale before I wrote Mercy.
Okay.
And I've run it by a lot of different people, but I no longer have an agent. And the editors with whom I used to work are all either dead or retired. So this one, I'm on my own sending it out.
Yeah.
And it may or may not find a publisher. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, good luck. And Mercy's a fantastic read.
Thank you.
If you want a character-driven book that's full of sort of both hope and very complicated, sort of, making a complicated life, really putting it on a page in a very honest, authentic way. I think you did a really good job, and I hope people will read it. You can get it anywhere, right? I mean, just
yes, absolutely.
Look up Bill Littlefield and order his book, or go to your local bookstore. Hopefully, it's there.
Probably find it at Thrift Books by now.
Maybe. Thanks so much, Bill. It's really great to see you again, and really get to connect about your book and everything else that's going on.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thanks for your interest, Tim, and keep up with your good work.
Thank you so much. What I Really Want to Talk About is produced and recorded in the studios of Berea College News and Radio in Berea, Kentucky. You can learn more about this podcast and listen to all of the previous episodes at whatireallywantotalkabout.com. My contact information is on the website, so please get in touch with me if there's something that you really want to talk about. I'm Tim Monroe. Thanks for listening.